so much for coming here tonight, and thank you so much for eating and drinking and enjoying the kind of space that we put together. It is exactly for things like this. So thank you. All right, have a great night.
Thanks, Pete. And thank you so much for hosting. All right, so what we usually do is we run through a little bit of announcements about what's going on in React Native. So let's go ahead and do that. The first important thing that happened this week is that Babel 7 is out. And the highlight of it is that it has TypeScript support now. So if you've been waiting to simplify your setup with TypeScript and Babel, you totally can do that now. And it has a ton of great features. Also, React Native 56 came out last month. And React Native 57, from what I hear, is coming out next week. It already comes with Babel 7. Now that Babel 7 is coming out, they're kind of like finalizing React Native 57 to work with it really well. Interesting thing about React Native 56 is that the web view is now HTTPS only. The geolocation is disabled by default. And they're also moving away from prop type, so it's probably a good time to start investing in something like Flow or TypeScript. What else? Another big thing that happened is that Emotion can now be used with React Native, and a lot of people have been waiting for this. Emotion's like a really nice, flexible CSS and JS library that a lot of people like, and is built on top of lessons learned from other CSS and JS libraries. And one thing that I want to highlight is that there's this amazing blog post about hunting JavaScript memory leaks in React Native apps. It's certainly something that I've needed, and a lot of companies here in the Boston area have had troubles with. So you might not get that link quickly, but just Google hunting JS memory leaks in React Native apps. It's a really, really good article. What else happened? Well, Chain React happened this summer. And the Chain React talks are out, and I just want to highlight some of the awesome talks that I got to see. Designing a Component Kit by Samantha Breathes. She was a speaker at our meetup a couple of meetups ago, so you guys got to know her. There's a really good talk on React Native as a junior developer. There was also this awesome talk by Ray on machine learning and React Native. It's just like seriously like it was like an Apple keynote almost. There's a talk about the state of React Native, and there's a lot of like big architectural changes coming to React Native over the next year. And one of the really interesting practical talks from that conference is React Native at ease, how React Native can get you high pretty much. And it was I would like to say that it was a really good talk about like the practical implications of using React Native at a company that already has a mobile app. And also be on the lookout for talks from React Native Europe. There's a lot of big stuff being announced next week. I also want to highlight a couple of React Native resources. I maintain a list of React Native folks on Twitter. Twitter is an amazing resource for React Native if you want to learn more. You can look at my list, and you'll find a list of about 90 people or so. And if you want to be included in that list, just tweet at me. There's also React Native Radio. There's the React Native newsletter by Infinite Red. And there's the Let's React newsletter. So every meetup, we're just going to put out some resources so you guys can stay on top of React Native. And next up, we would like to do jobs or any announcements. So if you guys are recruiting, or if you're looking for a job, we would love to hear from you now if you want to get up here. Anybody have any announcements?
Hey folks, how's it going? I'm David. I'm a co-founder at Ember Labs. We're a spinoff that came out of MIT about 5 years ago. And we're a wellness tech company. We build products that use temperature to make people feel better when they're feeling overheated, when they're feeling freezing, when they're feeling drowsy, or when they can't sleep, stuff like that. Our first product is a bracelet. It's called Ember Wave. I'm wearing it right now. And anytime that I'm feeling too hot or too cold, I can basically dial in something really nice and cold, as if I had cold water on my forearms, or something nice and warm, as if I were holding a mug of hot tea. And we've been launched so. We have about 10,000 Emberwave users around the US who are using our product. We've had about 500,000 sessions of feeling better so far. It's a product that's hardware obviously, but comes with a mobile app that lets you augment the functionality, control it from the mobile app, customize in a lot of different ways. And we are going to be transitioning from native to React Native, and we are going to be bringing what was an offshore project in-house. So we're very excited about that transition, and we're currently hiring a React Native developer who will be leading the project, kind of architecting that entire transition, and also managing kind of a support team offshore that'll help with QA and backend and other things in support of their primary development role. So come find me during this talk or after. I'm easy to find. I'm David at emberlabs.com. It's missing the second E, so EMBR labs.com. And I think I also posted on the meetup group a little while ago, so if you look it up, you'll find me that way. Cool, folks. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thanks to Drift for hosting.
Hey guys, I'm Jeremy Gilbert from Paratherapeutics. You guys will hear from me more later when I give when Ed Diaz and I give our talk. We are building out our East Coast React Native team. We already have 12 developers on the West Coast. We are building a whole bunch of apps that basically affect human health outcomes. We have the first FDA cleared mobile application. It's literally prescribed by a doctor and reimbursed by an insurance company. It's kind of really exciting. We're kind of on the edge of medicine, and you'll hear more about it in my talk. So we are definitely hiring, looking to build a whole team out here in Boston.
Do you have it?
Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm Dan from Humon. That's Humon, and we've made a product that measures the way your muscles use oxygen in real time. So it turns out this is the best metric of physical exertion that you can get, and by using this data, we can provide very actionable and real-time training feedback, and are working on building out a complete solution as part of our AI coach. Our production app is in React Native now. Most of the development has been done a little bit in-house, mostly offshore, and we're also looking to grow the team here in Cambridge. Looking to hire one minimum and probably some more roles. So just shoot me an email. I'm Dan, so dan@humon.io, or catch me after the talk. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Nick Safinos. I don't own any company or anything like that, but actually I'm coming from the other side of the aisle there. I'm a React Native developer, and I just want to mention anyone who may be looking for anyone to fulfill a contract need. My main thing is that I've been doing a lot of projects in React Native, and I'm always looking for work where I can stay remote and work out of my office there in Cambridge. I was a former co-tenant with David at Ember Labs there over at Industry Labs, and I have a little desk there I like to hang out and do my own thing. But anyway, if anyone needs any advice on React Native work for a contract or a project, let me know. I'll be here hanging out.
Do you have anything?
One more? I thought
Yeah.
this was a line. Hey guys, everyone hear me okay? Sweet. First of all, thanks for having us. My name is Franklin. I work at a healthcare company called Firefly Health. We're currently 3 people, and we're looking for a 4th. We're building a tech-enabled primary care platform for patients to connect them to providers. So if you guys are looking to move, looking to join a really early stage startup, I would love to talk to you. You can reach out to me at franklin@firefly.health. Also, shout out to Pear. Pear is awesome. So if you're looking to get into healthcare, also talk to Pear. Big fan. Congrats on your FDA approval. Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you. So I'd just like to remind you that we have React Native Boston Slack. So if you want to network more, or if you have any questions, we can definitely help you out and get you connected. So make sure that you join us on our Slack. And I think that's it. I'm going to kick it off to Chris, and we're going to introduce our speakers.
So first things first, who was the lucky recipient of the one squid sticker that I was able to get from React Rally? Who picked that up? Awesome. It was a cool sticker, so just had to see. OK, so let me get this going. All right, these are going to be our speakers tonight. First, I'd like to introduce Ray Deck, and he's going to be talking about plugins for the React Native CLI. He's the CTO of Element 55, and this guy, if you ever have native questions or bridging questions, he's probably a good person to talk to. He's been through the mud, so to speak, on all of that, and has some really great ideas, and he's created some really great libraries around it. So I'll kick it off to Ray.
Yeah. All right, everyone hear me okay? Okay. Yeah, my name is Ray Deck. I am CTO of Element 55. Occasionally I know how to go into presentation mode. And I'm here today to talk about probably the least React-y part of React Native that still is a bit in JavaScript. I was at Chain React. I had the privilege of talking with a bunch of really smart people who are both involved in the creation and extension of React Native, and also been at a couple of native conferences and trying to ask the question, what's hard about native development that has the opportunity to be easy through like the structure that React Native gives us? And in the spirit of you can only learn what you almost already know, what I found was that the ability to configure an application in a repeatable and reliable way is something that React Native affords us that if you are working inside Xcode or working inside Android Studio, you don't get. Because as soon as you start going into the GUI, you move from a mechanical or factory type process to one that's more crafting, one that involves minor changes and makes it much harder to be tracking what's going on. So I found there to be tremendous leverage in the command line aspect of React Native in terms of being able to initialize and configure our applications. I think somewhere in like the meetup notes it says that I've written like 50 plus React Native packages. And most of these are actually micro packages that are about extending this functionality to be able to configure applications in ways that are otherwise either hard or kind of crafty or require more native knowledge to do if you were to do them through the GUIs. Or that just lend themselves to wanting to be repeatable. Because my idea of a good time is not like most people's idea of a good time. My idea of a good time is something like this, where I will repeatably spin up an application with the same set of settings in order to be able to dial in whatever problem it is that I'm trying to fix. And I'll do this through probably 4 steps. The first is the first is just initializing your plain vanilla React Native project. Because when you initialize a React Native project, you are actually telling it to create what it calls the Hello World template, which contains stock libraries, a stock piece of welcome to React Native code that I think we're all pretty familiar with at this point, and that will work by default with fairly old versions of both Android and iOS, and not much more. I'm going to leave CRNA out of the picture for a minute, because this really is about configuration, and CRNA sort of obviates the need for configuration if you color inside those lines. Because the big opportunity here is to add things to React Native that weren't previously there. And being able to just through adding NPM packages, which could be local files, they could be links, they could be on NPM, they could be from your GitHub. We all know how to do NPM, NPMI or yarn add. Be able to add native code like the React Native camera community package, React Native Core ML, which exposes the machine learning interface for iOS. React Native Camera iOS Enable, which is actually an example of this configuration question I was talking about, which sets the privacy flag in your Xcode project to allow the camera to work, where otherwise you had to go into Xcode, and if you go into the React Native Camera documentation, they tell you to go and change this flag in this plist. But if you just do it through adding it from the command line, you now have that repeatable process as opposed to the crafted one. As well as a couple of other packages, like fixing iOS version to make it an iOS 11 project as opposed to an iOS 8 project, because if you want to use machine learning tech, that's iOS 11 only, or now iOS 12. Then, with these packages added, you can tell React Native to go to town. You can use this command line interface to run arbitrary commands, like in my case, the set dev team command, which sets the development team of your app in Xcode, which then configures automatic signing and provisioning of the application. This sets the stage so that I can run on the device without ever opening Xcode. And then running React Native Link, which, if you're not using Expo, is big center of gravity. Because React Native Link connects the various pieces of native code, either in the form of your static libraries or your Maven and Gradle dependencies on the Android side, into your React Native app, so that that code can work together, as well as being able to run arbitrary scripts, and we'll be talking more about those in a minute. And then because all these things have been set up from the command line, I can kick it out to my device, and the app will just run with camera support, with machine learning support, with running on iOS 11, with the privacy flag flipped, and I can just do code in JavaScript without any additional configuration, and certainly without ever having to open up Xcode. And the same thing, by the way, applies to Android Studio. So from where I sit, this approach has three big advantages. The first one is eminently repeatable. Like, I have set up this list of commands, semicolon, semicolon, semicolon. They're just all in my history. If I want to repeat and rebuild this environment, up, 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 enter. And it just goes. And that means I had the same environment every time, not worrying about that kind of crafting. It's non-interactive. Does anybody here use Fastlane? OK, the rest of you should be using Fastlane. It is awesome stuff. It's not the only way of doing things, but it's a pretty good one. And a key idea in Fastlane is the idea of taking a big process that is frankly kind of slow and being able to run the whole thing and notify you at the end that it's now done, as opposed to babysitting your steps as you go along. Having that at the front end is really quite helpful as well. I kick off this process, and it's going to take however long it takes to go build all these things. But the first experience I'm going to have working with it is going to be when Visual Studio Code comes up and my phone pops up with the app, and now I'm ready to be developing. In the meantime, I can be doing whatever other work I need to be doing. And then finally, and I think this is a key one too, I'm not changing my bash scripts. I'm not changing my profile. I'm not changing the way that my whole development environment works, because adding the packages in the manner that we just saw scopes any changes that I've made to that specific project that I was working on. So the specific version, so via both the package JSON and the yarn lock, I now know exactly what is in this environment, and that is different from what's going to be in any of the others. And that isolation lends itself to better development. The functionality that allows us to extend this and take advantage of this power is called RNPM, or was originally called RNPM, which was originally developed by Mike Grabowski and, does anybody remember the other fellow who created RNPM in 2015? Another Polish fellow who did awesome work. And their work was so good that in early 2016, Facebook took the RNPM technology that they had built and moved it into the core of React Native. And now it's part of the local CLI subdirectory in your React Native package. But so that means that the way they design things is the way it works now. And it is also the best documentation on how to exploit this is going to be in their GitHub repository. Even as the very top is this GIF of President Obama doing the mic drop because they weren't working on it anymore. So their documentation is really good and points to the two main ways that you can extend this functionality. The first is being able to add arbitrary commands to the React Native environment that have the advantage of being isolated, self-documenting, et cetera, and being able to extend the link cycle of having React Native Link be able to do a lot of work in terms of configuring your app without requiring any additional opinions to be expressed. Now, this is the point where my talk just took a sharp left turn about 4 hours ago, because I had prepared and rehearsed, was walking through a few of these packages I had built and showing by example how it is you can create these things. And I realized that this is all a little bit harder than it had to be. And so I changed the focus a bit. So that the idea is that we have React Native, and the React Native command is the one that we run to be executing any of these commands, link, the proprietary stuff, run iOS, et cetera. We have access to React Native because we installed React Native CLI. So I think it stands to reason that if we wanted to, we could have React Native CLI to create command line interfaces for React Native. And that is basically what I've done. I put it up on Yarn, put it up on NPM, so it was actually Yarn gettable as of about 100 minutes ago. And it's what I'm going to use now to talk about how this stuff works. So I'm now going to go into live demo mode and wish me luck and avenge my death. OK, so, no, sorry. What I need to do is say and show. Here we go. All right. Here I am in a terminal, and I can do a yarn global add of React Native CLI. And it will add that globally, and I now have access to React Native CLI as a command to be able to create new things. It uses the same interface as React Native does, in that it uses init as its command. And because we're using Commander and we try to be self-documenting, it will tell you how to use itself. So I can now create an extension for the React Native command line interface. We'll call it React Native RN Boston. And it'll say it doesn't work because I have to do init just like I have to do with React Native. And now it's created. And you'll see here it is in my directory, React Native RN Boston. And to save us a little bit of time, I've already spun up a React Native app so that the React Native init process is already done for us. I can go into CD test app, do a yarn add of React Native RN Boston, and it adds it in. Now, if you want to find out how to be interacting with this React Native project, you can run React Native -- help, because React Native also uses Commander and is self-documenting in this fashion. This will show you all the core commands that you have available to you: start, run iOS, reset cache, all that stuff. But it also gives you access to the things I just added here, which are the RN Boston extension. And now I can just run RN Boston, and it tells me that it ran that. In the further spirit of self-documentation, you can use RN Boston -- help. This, by the way, is all stuff you get for free with React Native. You won't know about any of these commands. You just do -- help at the end. You can find out how they work. But similarly, even the custom extensions are self-documenting. Native RN Boston. And it will reflect the fact that I selected the demo argument. Now, I admit, I can see the point. This is a trivial example. It's not actually doing anything very interesting. But what it is giving you is access to the API in a way that is clear in terms of the way that it's generating outputs. And if we were to look at that through code, can everyone see the text OK? Is that big enough to be readable? We can see how this interface works, how we can get access to the way the React Native command line interface. And the decisions are all made via the package JSON. So in a package JSON, for any module you would add into your React Native project, it looks for, and by the way, it'll only look at your dependencies and dev dependencies. If you did an npm I without save, it will never find your package. So make sure that you save it in your dependencies. But it'll look for any package that contains a key called rnpm, because they never bothered to change the API. And the rnpm is expected to be an object that contains at least that contains keys, and we'll use those keys. You may have used the rnpm project before for the distribution of assets. You may have used it for certain types of Android configuration. But I'm focusing today on the aspect of rnpm and the part of it which allows you to add code to the party. And here, the plugin, you can specify a file, a path to a file, or a directory for that matter. And that file just needs to export either an array of objects or just one object, and it'll figure out that it wasn't an array, of the commands. And so here's where the RN Boston came from, right? Where the name was RN Boston. The description that you saw in the help, just to show you here, right? Demonstration of a command without an argument. All that stuff you get just by having documented in here. You can set up your options for flags. Those options will then be referenced by name in an argument down below that's called func, which is just what it sounds like. It's a function containing 3 arguments. argv is going to be whatever string was passed after the name of your command. args is actually a set of basically environmental information. And options, which contains information about any switches that you might have defined under options up above. And that's the reason why this func is able to run that console log, which says running the command rn Boston that we saw before. And also, in the event you set these flags, be able to work with that information to show that back to you. That's all there is to it from a plugin point of view. That's how you access that API. But you already saw that in the package.json, there are 2 parts to that. And I've talked previously about React Native Link. Now, the React Native Link aspect, if you used that before, allows you to bring in native code using some standard conventions around importing static libraries, CocoaPods, and a Gradle and Maven dependencies. But you can also have it run code, either before or after that link process is to occur. And not for nothing, the source code that you're linking in, right, like your static library for Xcode or the Gradle dependencies for Android, it checks and will only run it once on a per package basis. But the pre-link and the post-link run every single time that you run React Native Link, which is a helpful fact to know. It will run exactly this command. So actually, there's nothing that says this has to be JavaScript, right? This is just an arbitrary command line. But hey, we're using React Native. Let's just do it in JavaScript, right? And so I have my pre-link and my post-link that simply announce that it's running this particular event. So I can do React Native Link. Oh. Let's see. Oh. In test app, of course. And you'll see that those 2 JavaScript files that we just saw, that just had those console.logs, will fire right off. This is how you access that API. And the goal of React Native CLI is to make it easy to access that API. But that said, just running a couple of console logs is kind of trivial. Why would you even bother? So let's look at some non-trivial examples. This one is a package I created 3 or 4 months ago called React Native App Icons. Its job is to deploy application icons into your app, which otherwise is something you would do directly through the app or through Fastlane. Directly through Xcode or Android Studio, or do it through Fastlane, which is a good way of doing it as well. But this allows you to do that without ever having to bring Fastlane to the party. And it does it by having your plugin. And the plugin, right, which is pointed to in the package.json as saying go to index.js. Great, here we are. And it defines a few functions, but it exports this object that defines setAppIcon, which asks you, hey, where's that image that you want to be using for your icons? And then saves that to your package.json for repeatability, and then runs this, which also would fire on link, which will, using image magic, take the URL that you found or that you gave it. It will download it into an image. it will then crop and resize it for each of the form factors that are necessary for both iOS and for Android, including for the App Store, and save those with the appropriate packages. And then you're just done. So to show how to use that, here we are in test app, and I will do yarn add React Native app icons. And just by having yarn added it, I now get access to the command. And there it is, set app icon. And it wants either a path, if I have something local on machine, or a URL. So let's pick something out. What kind of image would you like for the app icon? Any requests? Sailboat. OK. How about this one, this billowing? Oh, that's tiny. This is a good one. Nice big image. So we'll copy that image, or the address for it at least. Paste that in. And it will run through ImageMagick to create the appropriate JPEG and PNG files that are used by these various systems. It will then also put it in, it will also edit the manifest files that are inside Xcode. Well, actually, in this case, just Xcode, so it knows where they are. And yes, I've got another plugin called React Native Xcode. I'm sorry?
Those are all iOS. What about Android?
Well, actually, it created them for Android as well. In fact, I think I've got update gradle that I'll be showing in 1 second. But you can see in iOS, just quickly, they're the sailboat icons. Now, I can fly without a net here. Yeah, and I can show it to you in Android. Everything here that I'm showing you is on NPM. I'll be providing you with links at the end of the presentation as well. The image is also not mine. So OK, so the idea is it runs, it creates these things, and then you're able to have access to these app icons. And I've created it to be repeatable and to be reusable by people who aren't me, so that can get more leverage from this level of understanding. A second one is, to your point about Android, being able to update Gradle. Now, one of the things I've been doing more recently is working a lot with Kotlin and React Native. In order to be using Kotlin with React Native, you cannot be using the same old version of Gradle that actually comes with a stock React Native project. You need to update it and update the Android plugin that goes along with it. So this actually doesn't involve extending that command line interface. This actually just works off link. So by doing a yarn add and then doing a React Native link after, it makes sure that my Gradle has been updated to Gradle version 4.4 and the plugin being appropriate. And the way that will work, if I look at my package.json, yep, it will run the CLI.js on the pre-link event. And what the CLI.js will do is it goes searching through my Gradle files to make the edits to work with, as I have up here, the current version of Gradle and also the newer version of the Android plugin for it, which is the 3.13 you have here. I bring this up because the interface to the CLI allows us to automate this process. And once you've figured out how to do it once, you can put it into code, you can make it reusable, and now it's usable across all of your applications, as opposed to something you might have crafted inside of React Native, or having to remember, well, and then you need to go open up Android Studio, and then inside Android Studio, you need to remember to go push this little alert button that says, please make this update, et cetera. This just command lines it. And the work of making this happen is work, right? It is a certain level of knowledge is required in order to know how to modify the project files that are sitting inside Android and inside iOS. But it's valuable knowledge to have, and this allows you to get leverage on that beyond just your application and a way to be able to share it either with your colleagues or hopefully back into the community as well. Now, a third just quick example here is I've shown so far plugins that exclusively do this, just apply a little bit of arbitrary code, right? Either in terms of adding a command or doing a prelink. But a big use case, and the original design use case for this stuff, was actually to be integrated with the way we do native code. And for those of you who don't use Expo, I wonder how many of you have had the experience of going to like the README page, right, of a cool piece of native extension code and seeing the instructions that say, yeah, sure, you do React Native link, and then here are 7 steps that you do inside Android Studio or Xcode. There's a better way. All Xcode and React and Android Studio are doing are editing text files. And if you can understand how those text files work, you can get real power over your apps, and you don't have to manipulate those text files just through the application. I've tested this. I keep on looking for the special sauce, the magic thing that like Xcode is doing or Android Studio is doing. They're just editing text files. If you know what text files are being edited, and it's not like there are a lot of them, you can track it through diffs, you can find out what's going on. Some of them you just kind of do blind, and some of them you understand the meaning of it. PBXproj is definitely in the former category. But what this will do is this package.json exposes both a plugin and a prelink. What do they do? This is about push notifications. And push notifications in Android require integration with Firebase Cloud Messaging in the main. In order to do that, you need to have your app be connecting at the Gradle level with cloud services. And that means editing the Gradle. So I have a prelink file that edits the Gradle, searches for whether or not you're talking to Google services, and if you aren't, adds a line, and if you are, that's fantastic. But there's a second thing you need too. I don't know how many of you have been working with like Firebase or FCM or what have you on the Android side. And that is, if you want to be working with these services, with Google services, you usually, and this isn't the only way of doing it, but it kind of is the easiest, usually want to have a Google services.json that is going to be cohabitating with your application. Well, how do you do that? Well, you can be making edits inside Android Studio, or what this will do is add Google services to your application from the command line. So if you've downloaded your Google services.json to, say, downloads from the Firebase site, well, you can run add Google services with the path to your JSON file, and it will simply put it right where it belongs, make sure it has the correct name, so it has 2 or whatever, it's all fixed for you, and then you're done. It's not a lot of code to make that happen, but because the code is now set, it is repeatable, and now I have an experience for being able to set this up that's entirely command line. No more am I opening up Android Studio. And similarly, for being able to set the application ID, which is also a Firebase thing. 3 examples of how you can leverage the React Native command line interface to be able to repeatably, reliably, non-interactively configure and maintain your applications. And hopefully, extend the experience to create a better developer experience for others who want to be working with these various native functionalities. So, a couple of gotchas that I've alluded to a little bit, or one of them I alluded to a little bit. The first is any extension that you want to work with one of your packages needs to be in your dependencies or dev dependencies. It can't just be in your node modules directory or somewhere in the tree. It's not going to walk those. It's only going to walk the dependencies and dev dependencies to even find these plugins for either extending link or extending the command line menu. The second is this idea of React Native. For reasons that somewhat escape me, RNPM was designed that only those dependencies and dev dependencies that start with the, counting this right, 13 characters of React Native dash will even be examined for the purpose of adding any plugins. There is one other way of doing it that involves having the word RNPM in front too, but that's not very helpful. So if you want a plugin to be available, you need to prefix it with the name React Native. It can have whatever scope, right? It can be in whatever directory, but the name of it needs to be React Native. Fortunately, the functionality of React Native CLI will warn you. Oh, sorry. React Native CLI init, Bob. Will warn you that, in fact, that's not even available to you. And of course, it will only warn you of that if, in fact, come on, where'd he go? Here we go, end the show. It'll only warn you of that in the event. I'll just do it one more time. Clear React Native CLI Charlie. And once again, I can't seem to type save my life, which just shows why you shouldn't do live demos ever. And it will warn you, in fact, if you don't name it with React Native prefix, because the pre-link and post-link will work, but the plugin functionality will not. OK. I find all of this useful because my operating theory of React Native is that React Native is like a conductor. And we are writing music for it. And we get to write it in JavaScript, which I like. And that conductor is able to tell all of these native components what to do. It's able to tell the networking subsystems. It's able to tell views. It's able to tell the camera, the core ML, et cetera. Where the native components themselves are like the instruments in this particular combo band. But we have an opportunity to orchestrate our apps in a more fundamental way outside of runtime by making use of this kind of technology to be able to configure and maintain our applications in this repeatable and reliable way. And I think that shifts our center of gravity to thinking not just about how do we integrate it with Swift or how do we integrate with Kotlin, but how do we work with plist? How do we work with PBXproj on the iOS side? How do we master Groovy, which is the language the Gradle is written in, or the XML files on the Android side? Because that is going to be the way that we can create apps that not only start easy, but that finish strong and allow us to shift from crafting, bespoke artisanal apps to being able to have the parts that can be engineered look more like manufacturing, and therefore focus our art on the part that matters. These are the packages that I've been talking about so far today, including React Native CLI, which is the global one that allows you to create these things easily. The 3 examples, all of them are public repositories. All of them are also distributed via NPM. And with that, I've gone a little bit over my 30 minutes, but very grateful for your time, and I'm glad to answer any questions. Things that I don't know, I'll craft and fumble around in the dark. Yeah. Things that I do know, once I do know them, I try to manifest that knowledge as software because I'm lazy and I don't want to have to do it again. And I don't want other people to ask me to do it. That's how I convert from being a labor-oriented organization to being a software-oriented one, where not only are we creating software, but we're leveraging software to create software. And I think that's kind of what I'm hoping to encourage us to be doing as a community as well. That said, I will also say that testing changes that calculus, changes it in favor of more automation, because testing requires repeatability. And when we think about unit testing at we're making a component, a presentation component, we're going to unit test it to make sure it works, do integration testing, and the other great tools that are available for that, applying that same level of discipline to the native code that we are to the JavaScript code will serve us well, because at the end of the day, the vast majority of the app that we're shipping is in fact native. And so by setting that up, I find that's a good place for us to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
OK. Other questions I can answer? Awesome. Thank you so much.